Schools of New York Diversity in Medicine webinar. I'm Jenny Tassler. I'm the Director of Government Relations and External Affairs here at AMSNY, which is the consortium of the 17 medical schools in New York State. This webinar series is part of the AMSNY Diversity in Medicine program to provide an opportunity for medical students to hear from diverse speakers on a wide range of topics. We are thrilled to be able to open this session to a broader audience. Tonight's webinar is Personal Finance for the Future Physician, and we have a wonderful panel here to talk to you. I'm going to turn it over to tonight's moderator, Dr. Abtin Tabaee, an Associate Professor of Otolaryngology at Weill Cornell Medical College. Dr. Tabaee?
Thank you. Let me just share my screen. Great. Is that showing up on your side? Great. Thank you very much. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. This is a real honor to be able to speak to an audience that is pretty unique. It's unusual for different programs to get together and have a common dialogue about important things in medicine. So I'm certainly privileged to be a part of this. I want to start by thanking Jennifer Tassler for all of her hard work in making this a reality. There's a lot of planning, dedication, and back and forth communication that went into the making of this. So anything that's born out of today's conversation goes to a great deal of her success. So thank you. My affiliation is Weill Cornell Medicine in New York. I'm an otolaryngologist, and like any specialist, we have our own little clan of people that we work with and know. And so I picked two people directly in my field who have an expertise in this field. We've shared a career together. We've shared a lot of common dialogue in this topic and in other topics. Let me introduce our panel. I also want to introduce Cameron, who's joined our family as of the past few years. So Seth Brown is an MD MBA by background in education. He's the founder of the Connecticut Sinus Institute in Hartford, Connecticut. His group eventually merged with ProHealth Physicians, part of Optum Care. He's an assistant professor of otolaryngology at UConn Health. And is a real mentor to me in many things, both in medicine and life in general. Jackie Jones was actually one of my early faculty members when I was a medical student going through training, and so she's been a lifelong mentor. She has had a dual career in both private practice and academic medicine, both with a highest degree of excellence. She was the founding partner of Park Avenue ENT Otolaryngology and recently rejoined our faculty as a full-time faculty member at Weill Cornell Medicine. Cameron Lewis holds two major distinctions. He's a former associate at Goldman Sachs, and he's currently the founding partner and portfolio manager at Compass Rose Asset Management. He's also the spouse of one of our faculty members, Dr. Lauren Brown. So not only is this like an amazing thing that we can collaborate at this level, but I think he also has a unique perspective, both a professional expertise in finance, but also living in a household where physician finance management is a reality. So thank you all for joining us. I'm going to be asking our panelists to comment on some of these very important topics. The model of this evening's event is a combination of some just ideas and points of discussion mixed with a healthy amount of panel input. So this is also in part supported by Brett Miles, who was originally slated to be on the panel this evening. He's the chair of otolaryngology at Lenox Hill Northwell in Manhattan, New York. He had an unforeseen sort of conflict come up last minute, but he was really helpful with me going through the slides and giving me some of his feedback on some of the content that we're going to present tonight. So thank you for Brett for helping with this. Personal finance is very much a personal thing. That's why the word personal is so embedded in the title. So a lot of the things we're going to talk about have value and maybe do connect with you on some level, but a lot of the topics are going to need your required personal specific attention. And so this topic and this ideas exploration that we're going to do tonight, it's a framework. It's not meant to be a script by which you live your life, but an idea and hopefully a generation of future discussion at your home level. So it's important to take a step back and ask, why are we even having this topic discussed? How are physicians so interesting from a financial perspective? Well, there's good and bad. And the good side is that we have long careers with a certainly high degree of financial stability. We tend not to have huge financial turmoil in our jobs. We tend to have pretty steady salaries that are often quite strong throughout our careers. They tend to grow gradually over the course of our careers. And so we don't have the huge financial upheavals of losing your job for 5 years and having to recreate your whole career. This is like who we are, and that does come with a huge positive from a finance perspective. We can potentially have long careers, far exceeding the average 65 age of retirement for many other careers. And this is, again, good and bad because you can continue to accrue wealth deeper into your life. We do also come with baggage. We typically graduate with 3 levels of debt. College, medical school, and even residency may not support our financial requirements. And so when you first start in your career at the initial salary in your 30s or even early 40s, you've accrued a fair amount of debt, and you've also accrued a lack of financial growth for that 20 years of life or 15 years of life. If you're in private practice, you may need to actually invest in your finance of your practice, and so that'll accrue more debt. And I think the biggest reality, and this is one of the things that we're trying to tackle right now, is that we may not have the foundation for being wise custodians of our own personal finances. And the reality is that we're often undereducated, underprepared, and underactive in how we manage our personal finances. And this could come in 2 bad ways. We can maybe be spending too much or not saving enough, both of which are harmful to us. So these questions are meant to be sort of one-on-one discussions. If a second or third panelist wants to chime in, please be my guest. But we do want to stay on topic. So I'm going to ask one panelist per comment unless otherwise directed. So Seth, you're actively involved in medical education. You teach residents. I know you've given many courses on this topic. If you take a step back and think about how medical schools and residencies are doing from sort of a report card perspective in training, teaching, and preparing our graduates to be good custodians of their personal finances, how do you think we're doing as a country?
I think the short answer is terrible. But with the caveat being we're doing a lot better than we did 10, 15, 20 years ago, right? So when I graduated 20 years ago, there was zero discussion of business management in medical schools. Now there are combined medical school MBA programs. There's a lot more discussion, but there's really not a whole lot of personal finance education. I think the one thing that some schools do is they bring in a financial advisor, which I do not think is really personal finance education.
I agree with that. And I think if I look back on my own career, the idea of even asking a senior faculty member, how much do I expect to make when I'm mature in practice, was almost taboo. So imagine any other career where like the salary as a starting point isn't even openly discussed. So I think this is an important point to make. You guys are future leaders. This is an area that we can change for the better. So as you evolve in your career, and if you have an interest in this, you can make a difference. This is a huge, huge need in our field. Jackie, from either from training or from life growth or personal experience, when a graduate typically finishes residency, how well do you think they are prepared for the realities of economic responsibility and sort of managing their own financial growth?
I think this is a great question because having graduated now almost 40 years ago, I finished medical school in '84. It was definitely a different era there, as Seth had mentioned. But I think there has been some improvement. But from the time that I graduated, I think you're absolutely right, Abtin. You never spoke about money. We all borrowed up to the hilt, to finish medical school and residency and all of our training. And many of us, especially those who go into long residencies, might have even had a family. Many people were married. Many people, bought a house, things that were financial obligations. And I do think that as physicians, there's this notion that you went into medicine for completely altruistic, reasons, and that, the finances of what you did really didn't matter. Making money really didn't matter, and how you supported your family really didn't matter. But I think that can't be the case now. I think so many people come out with high debts that we need to make sure that as people finish, that they are, well educated and have a plan on how to get themselves from A to B, and to have the things in life that will, make what we're doing, because what we're doing is hard, make what they're doing a little bit easier. So
I think that's healthy. Cameron, you have a dual expertise, both professionally and personally. From your perspective in the finance world, and seeing Lauren, your wife, go through this as a physician, were you surprised that this wasn't more openly discussed on her educational basis, maybe, or in terms of like how the finances of the world should be sort of taught to the medical community?
No, not surprising at all. The reason I'd say it's not surprising is because I worked at Goldman for almost 10 years, and you would think that personal finance is well known there, but it's also not. And so I would say one of the unfortunate realities of our entire country is that personal finance, the way to really do it is kind of it's information that it's not really taught in schools. And even if you were in the financial industry, there's a difference between making a lot of money as a trader and personal finance. And so I would say, and even in our industry, a lot of people don't understand basic personal finance. So yes, the fact that I have a lot, my wife works on with you guys, and I have a lot of friends who are doctors. The fact that they didn't get really taught much personal finance doesn't surprise me, because it's not really taught. I went to Wharton undergrad. It's not really taught in school. It's not taught at investment banks. It is kind of a thing that either you learn from someone who's in your family or from someone who's a close mentor, or a lot of people end up not ever learning. And that's why you have so many people with poor personal finance and credit card debt. And that is actually just the reality of it. So yes, no, I actually don't think doctors are uniquely unprepared. I think they are just the same as many, many other industries.
Interesting. I would not have guessed that answer. That's an interesting perspective.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed hearing that.
Plenty of people in finance who know nothing about personal finance.
Because I would have thought the exact opposite. So it's refreshing to hear that we're all kind of wading through this. There was an interesting publication that I sort of prepared for this. This was 2018 data, so it's maybe not exactly what it is now, but since then we've had COVID, which has disrupted a lot of the statistics that we might care about. But this survey was 20,000 plus physicians across different demographics, different age spans, multiple specialties. And they basically asked, how do you deal with your money on a daily basis? And there were 4 findings that I thought were particularly interesting. The first, that the majority of physicians have a net worth of less than $1 million, which is perfectly fine if you're early in your career, but if you're heading towards middle or late retirement timing, is completely inadequate. Something like 3 to 5 million is required if you're going to stop working at 65 and then live 20 more years on no income, no direct income per se. And so this seems like an under wealth accumulation over your lifetime. The second point that they made was that many physicians, up to upward of 35 to 38%, will continue to have educational debt deeper into their career and even into their 40s or early 50s. Again, a kind of concerning number. I think the most concerning thing I saw in this survey was that half of physicians live at their means on a monthly basis, indicating that they're not actually saving or preparing for the long-term future, but basically they use up the income that comes in on a monthly basis and don't have that much afterward. They also commented that a lot of physicians don't actually have a goal, financial goal in mind. So to say that I'm saving for X number of dollars for my retirement at a certain age just wasn't on the radar for 47% of physicians. It sounds like, Cameron, this doesn't surprise you. I was kind of horrified to see it. But looking at these numbers, I think, just as making kind of a report card assessment of how we're doing, I don't think we're doing as well as we should be. And I think this kind of conversation is incredibly important, because a lot of this is sort of manageable or preventable, or there's a solution that you can kind of come up with. Anyone in the panel want to comment on these kind of findings, what it means to you? Did it jar you in any way? It certainly jarred me to see number 3 on this discussion.
The one thing that I think it's not surprising at all to me, and most professions are like this. I think the one difference for physicians is that because your both income and job is so stable, you can almost say with certainty it doesn't need to be the case for like 90% of physicians. Because it is so reliable and stable, there is an actual model on how to not end up with these statistics, more so than many, many other professions, because they are so volatile. Like my profession is extremely volatile. People come and go, and careers are very short. And I think I probably have the most volatile professional career path where the turnover is just very, very high. And physicians probably have the least volatile. And so when you have such small volatility, and we can know almost with certainty how much money you will make over the course of your career on day one within a relatively tight band, we should be able to plan and execute the plan pretty well. And so doctors should not fall into this, but they have to kind of know what the plan is. And most people don't really know what the plan is.
And Abtin, I think it is a jarring statistic. The one thing we have to remember as physicians is that our income is based on our labor. So there's a lot of professions where Cameron can start a business, and he can start an asset portfolio management business, and he can have 20 people working for him, and they can all be making money, and that money will eventually come back to him. The vast majority of physicians, their model is that you perform a service and you get paid for that service. So if you go through a period in your life where you need to slow down, or God forbid you get sick or something along those lines, then your income is going to significantly drop. So having those numbers where you're living right at your means is very, very dangerous, because of the way that our income is so based on an interactional transaction. We don't make money just, being on the computer or sitting at home or something like that. We need to see patients. We need to actively engage for the vast majority of physicians. So it's really worrisome.
So moving on to this sort of transition from the problem now to maybe looking at solutions, let's take a quick tour of why our finances actually matter on an individual basis. This is very personal, so this is not going to apply to everyone in the same way, but there are some common themes. So long-term financial stability is important. And what this is kind of defined by is a gradual, sustained increase in your net worth with as little volatility as possible. Basically, you accumulate assets. It's built into savings of many kinds, how much your home is worth, how much you have in different funds that you're accruing wealth for. And that sort of nest of money does things for you. It allows you to support your monthly schedule, your life, your household needs, any hobbies that you might have. And equally importantly, and probably a lot less sort of sexy, but in some ways foundational for your life, it allows you to achieve long-term financial goals, owning a home, paying for your children's education, retiring, having an expensive hobby like a second home or a car, a fancy car, or potentially a boat. And then finally, the thing that is also important is to avoid things. You want to avoid financial strain and calamity, which could mean debt, foreclosure, bankruptcy. I mean, this kind of idea is pretty generic. It applies similarly to everyone, but it often gets neglected. And so especially how you get here, how you achieve these goals is incredibly important. Jackie, you're with the most kind way I can say this, you're the most senior person on the panel. How has financial planning been important in your career in different stages, when you were first starting out, when you were raising your family, now that you're maybe starting to think about retirement in the next whatever period of time? How important was the planning part of getting to those goals for you?
The planning was really important for me, and I didn't come to planning till later in life. So I'll be 65 in a couple of months, and I'm not going to retire, though I can. I'm not going to retire just because I think I'd be too bored, and I happen to love what I do. But, I came out of medical school, as many of you will, with a fair amount of debt. So I did what you shouldn't do, is I waited on paying off my school loans, and I held on to them for about 10 years. And that wasn't the best. I bought a house, I did all sorts of things with money and held on to my student loans, which I shouldn't have. You need to get rid of those quickly. But then what I did is, when my children were small, I started to set a plan with my husband where, we would set aside, we would try to live within our means, but any bonuses we got, we'd immediately put it into retirement. And I think that's something that you need to talk to, your partner and the person who you share your financial future with, to try and set up a way that together you can come up with an amount of money that you put in every single year. And it's really worthwhile, early on starting to invest. Like, I have a son who's 31, I have a son who's 26. And both of them have started, at my pushing, have started to invest they put their money in Vanguard because it's cheap and they take a little bit of their salary every month. But if you start right away, it's amazing how much you can build up over time.
We're going to touch on those themes throughout the talk. So thank you. Yes, I couldn't agree more that the earlier you do this, the better you do it, the more thoughtful you are about it, the more likely it's going to be successful. The meat of our evening tonight is going to be the next 20 minutes or so, and that's really talking about strategy. How can you become more responsible about your personal finances? I'm cognizant that the people I'm speaking to right now are sort of not at the point where they're going to accrue a huge amount of wealth. You're not hitting your peak salaries for maybe 5 to 10 years minimum. But these sort of disciplines, these daily or monthly behaviors are something you can absolutely start now. And you can build on it as you get more and more money. The principle is the same. The ideas are the same. It's just the dollar amounts will change as you get older. But the sooner you do it, the better you are going to be about it. And there's certainly a value in doing this as quickly as possible and to let things grow over a period of time. So we're going to talk about 3 big topics. There are many more topics we could possibly tackle, but these are the 3 ones I thought would be helpful and important for tonight's conversation. How to be responsible with your monthly budget, how to think about your long-term financial umbrellas. We're going to talk about what I mean by that. And then just a brief commentary on just some strategy for investing. That's actually not the focus of this. I have no expertise in that. And it's frankly just a bigger topic than what to tackle. But I think some brief ideas, even how to start broaching investing, is important. So in terms of your monthly budget, there are things you should be doing on a month-to-month basis. We're going to tackle these 4 subdomains: creating a monthly budget, paying off your debts, thinking about your savings on a week in, week out basis, and then having an emergency fund and what that means. So in terms of a monthly budget, these numbers should be pretty transparent and pretty calculable. You're going to have a certain income, usually very, as Cameron alluded to, very predictable, very steady, very straightforward. You can even plan it a couple of years ahead of time. Your monthly budget should also be pretty similarly calculable and planned. How much are you going to set aside for housing, transportation, childcare, food, entertainment, which could be many things, loans, savings, and investment in healthcare. These numbers have to make sense to you. And so one important exercise is to actually do this calculation. There are many different platforms online for free where you can plug in the numbers, see how much is left over, and then you can think about directly, where's my money going? Even a resident salary is valuable to do this exercise. It's not going to be big numbers and you're not going to have a huge amount left over for savings, but it's important to know where your money is going. Otherwise, how can you possibly be responsible about it? So the way I do this, every single month, I actually have an Excel spreadsheet. I have different categories that I save month to month. I save the previous few months so I can compare my numbers. I look at the different categories of where my month is going. I do this at the end of the month when my paycheck comes in and I know exactly where every single dollar is going. I look at every credit card to make sure I'm being thoughtful and not overspending. I communicate with my wife openly. At first in our marriage, it was somewhat of a tense, painful conversation. I think both of us had some baggage about money, but over time we've learned to find a common ground. You have to. You're sharing a fund together. You're sharing a life together. So the way I do this is very deliberate. I do it every single month. It's really important. And I know exactly how much I'm able to save towards my retirement, towards my long-term goals. And if I don't do that successfully, now I have no one else to blame but myself. So it's a deliberate methodology. There are many tools online you can use to do this, but I think even a basic Word, Excel document will go a long way because you're actually doing something. You're not just letting it passively happen and then finding out yeah, I got $50 in my savings account and nothing to do with it. I'd like to hear anyone's comments from the panel about your strategies for managing your monthly finances. What have you found?
I'll start. So I think you're exactly right on, you have to know, but there are lots of detail that you can go into it. And I think for each person, the amount of detail is going to be variable. And so I would compare it to similar to dieting or the way your health choices are. You need to know how many calories you need and how many you're eating, right? To maintain your healthy weight, you need to know how many calories do I need, how many am I eating? And for, some people, they'll do that extremely detailed and they will log every little thing. And then some people will have, I kind of know how much this is, I kind of know how much that is. And this is in total how many I need. And that person will also regulate their weight. I think for your budget, it's exactly the same. You can do it extremely detailed where this is every single dollar I spent, is every little category. I think a lot of people, that will be too nuanced for them. They won't be able to, it will be too overwhelming. It will be too much of their everyday life. But at the same time, they have to know, all right, $1,000 a month is the amount I want to spend. And I know roughly these things equal to 1,000, but that is the number. And I want to save XYZ dollars a month, and that is the number. And so you don't have to necessarily count every single dollar, but you do have to know exactly what the number is that you want to spend and the amount that you are earning so that you can save. So that number has to be a positive number, the amount that comes in and the amount that goes out. It's like running a business. I think the way I describe this to people when they're first starting is like personal finance is not the reason that people who are in the industry and are bad at this is because it's not necessarily making a lot of money. There are plenty of people who make $1 million, 2, 3, 4, 10 a year who have bad personal finances, because it's not about how much money you make. It's about how you actually spend less, keep that excess, and then your money will work for you as you keep accruing excess and excess. So a lot of people just put their head in the sand. They don't know what that number is on how much they're spending. They should know how much they're making, but you can do it really detailed, or you can be a little bit looser, but know, okay, at the end of the day, the credit card bill has to be under this amount, because that is my hard line for me to save some money. So I think it's up to person how detailed, but that's how I would say the bigger framework.
And, a lot of people talk about sort of the 50, 30, 20 rule. 50% of your salary should go to needs. So that's like rent, utilities, groceries, insurance, and your minimum debt payment. 30% should go to wants, like your credit card bill and all sorts of fun things. And 20% you should put in savings. So I was never one of those great people, but I tried to budget and look at, I have the 50%. What am I going to spend on rent? Do I get a really great apartment, or I get a little smaller apartment? Am I get a really great car, or gonna rent a Hyundai? So I think that's one of the big things. Take 50% of what you're going to make, and put in the things that you have some control about. How much you spend on rent every month, how much your car payment is. And the other thing that I would also recommend that I did really early that I think was worthwhile is to try and get people in your life that can help you. So I bought my life insurance and my disability insurance when I was in my residency, and I paid minimum amount for them, and I still have them, at almost 65 years of age. So I think it's worthwhile. And I have the same insurance broker now that I had when I was in my residency in University of Pennsylvania, in the 1980s. So having someone stable in your life that can give you sort of advice, and, finding an accountant and someone who's maybe young who can be your accountant for, 30 years and just keep you on track. And again, maybe even investment advisor. You don't have to have, $1 million to invest in a portfolio, but you can go to Vanguard, you can go to Fidelity, you can have someone who can help you, sort of keep you on track. And I meet with those 3 people 3 times a year. And, they yell at me or I yell at them. So, and I think having those people who've known me for 40 years is really helpful.
Within the framework of monthly allocation of funds, there's always this discussion of loans. To some degree, loans are inherent in medicine. It's almost impossible to avoid these to some degree. And you can think about where the loans are and sort of good, acceptable, or bad loans. The good loans are the ones that keep your career in the right direction. Medical school, college, developing a practice, starting your practice, paying for that stuff. The acceptable loans are things that you actually need to live. It could be an initial home, could be an appropriate car. Appropriate is something that gets you from point A to point B, but doesn't stretch your budget to an insane limit. And then there's certainly bad loans or debt. So this could be credit card accrual for luxury items or for things that you don't need to spend money on, or things that frankly just don't fit a budget that's matching your salary, a second home, a luxurious home, a big car, a fancy car. And so what we look at in terms of loans and paying this off, we're going to talk about some strategy in a second. It's important to understand whether your loan is a good one or a bad one in your life. And minimizing bad loans is a huge step. There's very little you could possibly do in terms of investment success to offset a bad loan. The interest rates are massive compared to what you'll do, especially when you factor in taxes, to actually get back in terms of investment. So before you start putting money towards like a Bitcoin kind of thing, you should be looking at your credit cards and debts and seeing where you are with all this. So that's the obvious comment of why it's important. Cameron, I'm going to go back to you because of your expertise. Certain debt, like medical school loans, could be relatively manageable. They could be spaced out over a long period of time. They could be relatively low interest rate. They might even kind of be offset by an investment with the same money. And yet people don't love the idea of a burden over their head. Is it financially wise, or it's too vague an answer to give for a general audience about how you should strategize repaying medical school loans specifically? I don't mean like credit card debt or anything like that, but just like a loan that you need to accrue to become a doctor.
I actually think that, there's, like, we joke. So I'm actually a credit trader by business. That's what I did at Goldman. That's what I do now. And so like, I have a lot of knowledge about that. And there's no bad loans per se, just bad prices for the loans, bad interest rates for the loans. And as you showed on your last slide, those interest rates go up materially down in that last category for credit card debt. So the way I would think about paying it off, not paying it off, it actually is kind of nuanced, right? And it matters in time. But I remember when I was going to college, interest rates were very high because I was in college before rates were so low. And so my student loans for college were 7-8%. And then when I started working at Goldman, the Fed had taken interest rates all the way down. And I was like, whoa, like 7-8%, like, regular interest rates are 1%. Like, I desperately need to pay these off. And then so like immediately, like I do nothing. I don't buy any investments. I do nothing until I pay these off at 7-8%, because they're just so much higher than what I could expect to return doing anything else with the money. So I think your student in general, it will probably be you want to pay them down before doing other things. There are some exceptions. If you have very low coupon interest rate loans, you might actually want to space them out on a schedule. I would say sometimes, you're thinking, oh, do I want to buy a car? Do I want to buy this car in cash? Do I want to buy this car, but I can get a 0% rate and space it out, and the payment fits within my budget. It fits within my budget, the payment, and it also allows me to tuck away $300, $400 a month into my stock savings plan, instead of maybe just doing 40 grand all at once, and then I can't put any money into my savings plan. That can make sense, but I think you need to just be cognizant. Like some people say, oh, credit card debt, why is it so bad? Well, credit card rates are 15 to 25%. And so I think people need to be aware of the actual rates they're paying, right? And so when you're more aware of the actual rates you're paying, like the one thing about doctors is they're all pretty smart, right? And they're all pretty good at math. And so, like, oh, well, yeah, if I'm paying 20% interest rate, that will never work. And if I'm paying a 3% student loan, actually, maybe I don't need to rush to pay that back all at once. Maybe it makes sense for me to budget it down, to pay it down over 5 years. Also, put some money away each month into the stock market over a 5-year period. And then that could actually work if your interest rate is that low. And so I think it's just the more knowledge you have, the more informed decision you can make. And what you can't do is say, oh, I have no idea. I used to yell at my wife. I would say, how much debt do you have? I don't know. What are the interest rates? I don't know. And like those are the unacceptable answers that don't allow you to make a smart decision when you don't know the total, you don't know the rate, you don't know the difference between a car loan and a student loan and a loan that is deferred. Some of the college loans and med school loans, they will defer them for you until you're out of residency. Those you do not want to pay back. You want to make sure you don't pay those back because they don't accrue interest. So it's not always so smart to say, oh yeah, just pay it back as fast as possible, because things that don't accrue interest until you're done with residency, you actually, you want to let that's basically an interest-free loan for a long period. So you have to look at those details, and the more informed you are, the better decision you can make.
The third point I was going to cover with regard to monthly thinking about your money is actually starting to save. That's, I think, a big part of today's discussion. Like, how do you start saving? Why do you do it? And what are you going to do with it? So ultimately, the goal of saving is to have an increasing wealth available to you for a variety of things, especially retirement. To do it, you actually have to save money. You won't have savings if you're not actually saving money. So this sounds obvious, but the reality is every month, if you don't do it, it's not going to happen for you. You should think about your long-term goals, what they look like, what the cost is going to be to own the house you want, to potentially retire at a certain age of your interest. How much money will you need to get there? And you can pretty much calculate that to a degree. Maybe it's not as accurate as you think it will be in 40 years, but it's a starting point, and you can keep adjusting those numbers as you get closer to the goal or as you get older. The ideal number, as Jackie alluded to, is about 20% of your gross income, the 50-30-20 rule. Now, this is an important number, but it's also important to point out that it's meant to be done every month for your whole career for as long as possible. This may not be realistic every month. They might not have 20% disposable income to save because you had a difficult month. What you don't want to do is put yourself in a position where you could have hit 20, but you just chose to spend the money superfluously to some degree. Now, how do you get around this? Well, there are ways of doing it. You can be deliberate, you can be thoughtful, you can also do it automatically. There are a variety of different investment tools that'll pull from your paycheck or savings account before you can actually do anything else. And so that money is already siphoned off, and then you're looking at the remainder of that income for your monthly needs. It's a great way of doing it as long as you're not irresponsible and overdraw, but this at least allows you to help invest more efficiently and more effectively. And studies have shown people do this better if they automate it. You also want to think about where you put your savings, the kind of retirement tools or the investment tools. Again, that's beyond the scope of today's topic, but the longer you do it, the better it's going to work for you. Your initial investment is going to be bigger, and the value of compounding interest requires time, literally decades, to be maximized for you. So again, do this early in your career, do it effectively. Just as an illustration, let's say you're setting off, let's say you're, an attending, you're doing pretty well. 400,000 a year is a solid, strong income for a lot of physicians. And let's say you put off 5.7%, about 22,800 annually. And then 25 years later, with something that bore 5% interest, which is solid, you have $1,219,000. That's a lot of money. It's pretty successful. It only happened because you did this for a long time and you did it every year. And this 5% is about right over the past 30, 40 years on average. There'll be terrible years, there'll be great years, but it works out over time because we're talking about 25 years. The other thing that this reflects is that over the source or time of the accruement, you didn't have a terrible year right before you want to take out the money. So you see a lot of asset distribution for savings kind of change their risk portfolio as you get older, less stocks, more bonds, for example. But if you did this in an extremely responsible way and you did 20% of 400,000 and you saved 80,000 a year, that's a huge savings, $4 million, a huge difference over that 25 years. Same interest rate, same time frame, but obviously you invested a lot more in principal up front. So you can see these numbers are obvious. The challenge is that we're talking about a lot of discipline and potentially more discipline that's either realistic or even necessarily appropriate. Because 80,000 of savings means it's actually 135,000 pre-tax dollars. And so your initial salary of 400,000, you're actually left with 265,000 for your other needs, your other 50 and 30% requirements. May not work for you, may not be able to support your other financial needs, but these numbers are important to understand. And so then you can say, yeah, I'm not going to hit 20%, I'm going to hit 10%. That's still pretty good, but I understand why I'm making the trade-off and what the numbers will look like. These tools are out there. They're pretty transparent. They're pretty helpful. Seth, what tools have you used in terms of kind of managing your month-to-month savings goals and over the course of a 40-year career?
Yeah, so thankfully I don't have a 40-year career yet, but someday I will.
You will, yes.
I think, yeah, someday I will. When I look at money, the way I look at it and the way I was kind of taught by my parents was the purpose of having money is so you don't have to worry about money, right? So if you buy expensive stuff and have a whole lot of debt, then the problem is that you're worried about how do you pay off all this debt, right? And so I think Cameron made the point about having things withdrawn from your paycheck so you don't even see it. I maximize, when I think about, the first thing I think about is how do I maximize any kind of matching program. So a lot of companies will have matching on your retirement. I maximize my retirement every single year, don't even think about it. I maximize any kind of programs through my state. For instance, there's tax deduction in the state of Connecticut for $10,000 for college savings. So I maximize that college savings every single year. And these are things I don't even think about. Because I work for a company, my job is part of Optum. They have matching for, and they have programs for buying stock, right? And you actually get credits for doing that. So I maximize all these areas to have money put aside. And then I think you brought up the really good point that it's not really where you're putting your money. The point is saving, right? And just trying to figure out how much you're appropriately going to save. It's trying to live within your means, right? So I don't use tools to go through my budget and whatnot. I actually use a financial advisor. Why? Because I spend a whole lot of time practicing medicine and I don't want to deal with all these finances. And I want someone to calculate how much do I need to save. If I want to do this and I want to retire at this age, what do I need to save? There's a lot of tools online, but I'm not really good at that, right? I'm really good at practicing medicine and I want to continue to practice medicine. Someone did tell me once that the best investment you could ever make is an S&P 500 fund, because very few money market fund managers actually beat that. So that's kind of what I do. And I do have that emergency fund that you have where I have cash on hand because I want to sleep comfortably at night, that I don't have to worry that if I got sick or something, I couldn't pay for my family.
So one of the things that we talk about, thank you, Seth, that was excellent. One of the things we talk about is this, this emergency fund. It was completely unknown to me until I started going to these lectures and hearing about it and understanding that it's important. And I was like well into adulthood by this point that it even dawned on me that this is a thing and it's a necessary thing, in fact. So the idea of an emergency fund is the following, that at some point in your career, you may lose your income unforeseeably and in a difficult time. And so in physicians' lives, as Jackie alluded to earlier, there's not like other sources of income. If you're not at work, you're not going to get paid. If you're not seeing patients, you're not going to get paid. Eventually, someone is going to say, well, we have to suspend your practice and this means your salary is on hold. Well, the bills don't stop coming. Your home doesn't give you a break on rent. You don't stop making other payments. And so you're in this awkward period before disability kicks in, usually around 3 months. As a caveat, you can get disability kick in earlier, but it's quite expensive. We'll talk about disability in a few minutes. But this accumulation of bills can be devastating, not just short-term, like you're not meeting these needs, but then the interest rate starts accruing and then all of a sudden you're buried for a long time. So the way to counteract this is to have a fund set aside completely separate from every other investment. It's not meant to be used for anything. It's supposed to be a very low yield, very safe, very conservative thing that covers you for at least 3 months, ideally 6 months. Just a wad of money that's somewhere safe. And so if you have a crisis, that it is available to you. It's one of the foundations, as I understand it, of being sort of personally responsible about your home finances. So that's monthly finances. I want to talk now about this idea of financial umbrellas. And this is basically some of the stuff we've already talked about, but basically things in your financial domain that aren't so obvious when you're first starting out. And that's includes retirement plans, includes disability, life insurance, and education costs, college savings plans specifically. There are definitely areas of expertise in the finance industry to help you with this process. Some of them are a little too for-profit, if you ask me. They may not have your entire best interest at heart. Some of them are very direct, very honest, very transparent. But these often go through an intermediary. You can't just pick up and get your own disability. You have to go through a disability broker, for example. But you should be knowledgeable about what you're signing up for and why you're doing it. So let's tackle these 3 domains. The first is retirement planning. As Seth alluded to, retirement planning can be supported, often is, by your employer. In many industries, this is a thing. In medicine, this has its own flavor. Hospitals will do it, big groups of healthcare providers will do it. Even small private practices will have something embedded in their hiring. It's a form of savings. It's a great form because it can be done and should be done, in fact, automatically. It's withdrawn from your pre-tax paycheck before you even touch the money. The fees are generally pretty low. There is a maximum limit. It's around $19,000 per year for most plans for our income bracket. They do offer a whole variety of investment opportunities. That's one of the decisions you'll have to make about your plan, like where's the money going? Again, there's professionals to help with that. And some employers will actually give you a match. So if you put in a certain amount, they'll match it. And that's just free money. So if you put in 10,000, they'll give you 10,000 of their own dollars to help your finances. It's done for employment retainment. They get some tax credit from it for it, so it's not entirely free to them. But it's a great thing for you, the individual. This has a lot of tax benefit for you, which is a huge component of being financially successful. The money's taken from your pre-tax dollars, so you don't actually pay taxes on that amount that you're investing upfront. When you take it out, eventually you might be in a lower tax bracket because you're taking out at a retirement time when you're not actually making income necessarily. And so this is a huge way of saving. You're saving for yourself. You're doing it in a long-term way. You're doing it often in an automatic way, and it's a tax favorable way of doing it, often in a way that's much better than any investment can do. This is just an illustration of what that could mean. So if you have a $100,000 salary per year, you take out 19,000, put it in one of these funds. It grows over 25, 30 years, in this case, 30 years of 5%. It's 1.4 million. When you get taxed on it, you do get taxed on the rate of return, but it's hopefully a lower tax bracket because, again, you're making less at that time of retirement. If you went ahead and tried to invest the same thing without putting it into one of these retirement accounts, first of all, the amount you actually invest is less because you get taxed on that upfront. It grows to a certain degree. It doesn't grow quite as well because it's a lower initial investment. There's probably some volatility here as well. And then eventually you do get taxed at a lower rate, but your total amount is different. I think this is important. I think these numbers matter. I think the most important thing to me is that I know in the back of my head, I've taken one aspect of my salary and put it towards maximally investing out of my hands. Automatically happens every single year. I know my employer is helping me with this, and I know I can do this for a long time. It's one other tool that's automated. And again, it's generally financially advisable. If you want to figure out how much you actually need for retirement, there are very easy calculations that can do. Financial advisors can help you with this. You can do this for free online. You can also just work with someone to figure out, but it's a lot of money. If you're going to retire at a relatively young age, 65, 70, and you want that opportunity, you got to think like decades ahead of time afterward to cover your healthcare needs, your finance needs, your housing needs, any expending you want to do on a world travel trip. It comes out to millions of dollars, literally. So if you're not planning your whole career, it's hard to get to that point. Seth, I think you alluded to this. We're running a little bit late, so I do want to keep going. But optimizing your retirement plans is basically putting the money in. Do it up front. Do it throughout your career. I do want to also talk about disability and life insurance. So these are important factors of life. They kind of prepare you for the emergency. They're basically replacing your financial responsibility if you lose your income, either because you're disabled or because you unfortunately pass away. These are done through brokers. Disability can be quite a heavy cost, especially if you're matching a high salary line. You need to get a specific type of disability. You're a unique provider. You can't have a disability that takes your job and says, well, you can't be a radiologist, but you could still flip burgers somewhere, so we're not going to give you disability. It has to be specialty specific, has to give you enough income support on a monthly basis to give you financial stability, should cover you to a healthy retirement age, at least around 65. And it should get close to matching about 50% of your salary. These are sometimes offered by the hospital system, but often not enough for you to meet your financial requirements. So you often need to supplement this. One of the tenets of this is you should get this ideally before you have any health issues, because as you get older, you accrue some health problems that may limit your ability to get disability, or it may make your disability much more expensive. Life insurance is pretty similar in concept. You're supporting your loved ones in the case you pass away. There are different types of plans, again, beyond the scope of this talk. Some of them are relatively low cost, but they don't have any investment value. If you don't use it, then you just spend the money and it disappears. Some do have an investment component, although it's not a great investment, it is something. And so you have to figure out how much of this you want to do. Most people who get life insurance will do a combination of term and whole life. Again, just something to explore down the line. So in brief answers, anyone who has any deep interest or expertise in this, please jump in. But first important question, how do you find a broker? How do you find like someone you can trust and rely on? Jackie, you alluded to having a team of people you've worked with for a long time. How do those relationships happen successfully?
I asked the senior residents in my residency. When I was at University of Pennsylvania, I did a 6-year residency, and you get to know these people and you so well that I really, asked around the people I trusted, and they pass me on to people. And as I said, I've kept those people in my life. I've changed my investment brokers over time, but my life insurance and, my primary accountant have stayed with me for almost 35 years. So I think that finding someone who knows you and sort of fits in your life. And again, I would answer the question, everybody needs disability, and everybody, I think, if you're going to have a family, needs life. And, in my family, I was the one who made the most money. So my life insurance was the highest. And also my disability insurance, I still carry disability insurance even at my age, because again, as I said, so much of our life is transactional. So if I'm out, I'm really going to get hit. I had the professionals in my life help me figure out how much I needed, and I increased that as my income went up. But again, buying life insurance early on and adding as you go, having that primary life insurance policy when you're getting it at 25 or 30, it's so cheap.
Seth, any
Forget it
comments?
I totally agree with Jackie, right? Find out from other people who you trust. They're pretty much most people are selling you the same thing. It's just finding someone you're comfortable with to do that. But absolutely, you need disability insurance. And if you have a family, absolutely, you need life insurance. I look at life insurance as if something was to happen to me, my family's taken care of. I don't look at it as an investment. So I don't have whole life. I just buy insurance. It's relatively cheap, like Jackie says. It gets me to 65, and then I'll deal with it then.
Just a brief comment, and then I want to focus with Cameron on just starting to become thoughtful investors. So childhood educational needs, especially college, is quite prohibitively expensive. College in private universities is greater than $50K per year. It's an increasing number, faster than inflation. God knows what it's going to be when our kids go to college. But we generally earn too much to have a lot of need-based financial aid thrown at us. And so we have to plan for this ahead of time. Otherwise, it's creating either a very high debt burden for your child or potentially a large chunk of income in sort of an unforeseen way. So there are these things called 529 college savings plans. Most states sponsor them. You don't actually have to live in the state to do it. And you don't actually have to know what your kid is going to do. It doesn't necessarily apply just for college. It could be done for other kinds of educational experiences. They're tax favorable for like the first 10,000, but you can put in more if you like. Again, to me, this is a great vehicle because it allows you to say every month or every month is when I get mine withdrawal. You could do it more or less. I'm putting away money for my child so that when she turns 18 and goes off to college, that I won't have to have this huge financial stress. It's not meant to be an investment. Like I can't take that money and I can recoup it, but I'll be paying huge fines and taxes for it. It's meant to offset a future cost that is pretty predictable. I mean, my child may join the military, she may become an artist, she may not, but if there's any high likelihood that you're gonna support a child's education college-wise, this is one of the tools you have to do it. So Cameron, the ability to invest, yeah.
The nice thing about a 529, you can earmark it to one child, and then if that child you don't need it for that child, you can give it to anybody. You can give it to a grandkid. You can give it to a niece. You can transfer it as long as it's paid for educational expenses. It doesn't have to be for the person you earmarked it for.
Right. Yeah, and there are a lot of clauses. It's generally a favorable vehicle. It's not meant to be played around with or used for like secondary gain, but for its purpose of education, it's a great tool. And again, it's tax deferred for a while. So Cameron, I think most physicians are either knowledgeably without knowledge of investing, like they know that they don't know how to do it. They know they're not savvy. They know that it's an uncomfortable territory. Or to me, the worst case scenario, they know just enough to feel like they're comfortable, but in fact, they're full of error in the way they handle day trading or Bitcoin or whatever. And so they wind up throwing a lot of money in different directions and hoping something sticks. Akin to gambling at times, and certainly not always judicious in terms of not doing the foundational work of saving for taxes and putting investment in the right places. I mean, obviously that's a thing to avoid if you can, but we also do have money and we do want to save and we do want to put it in thoughtful areas. So this is not meant to be like finance investing 101 by any means. This is not our expertise. This is not going to be conveyed in this talk. but maybe some tools. When do we use financial advisors? How do we pick a financial advisor? How do we look at our portfolios and how do we think about it? How much personal time should we put in, time and energy should we put into becoming knowledgeable? Anything you can give as a starting point of advice to our medical students and residents?
I'm going to give you a framework on this. So, I'm a hedge fund manager. Most people should not be trading. Most 99% of people should not be trading. Physicians, lawyer, most people who are in finance, most. Like that's like like you are not going to do a good job of it. It is a full-time job that people spend their entire careers doing it. The same way I probably shouldn't give health advice too detailed, right? I didn't go to med school. Like day trading and whatnot, that is not, you just shouldn't do it unless you are a professional who does it, because it is very, very difficult. And it's very similar to gambling. So I would just say, rule it out. I would say the other thing that a lot of people get caught up in the beginning is they hear about a lot of high risk investments and they say, oh, I want to know, Cameron, tell me about crypto. Oh, Cameron, tell me about these high volatility internet stocks. And people are, they gravitate to things that have the most risk because they can make the most amount of money quickly, but you can also lose the most amount of money. And when people forget, they hear all these stories about, oh, this person became incredibly wealthy overnight. This person made all this money. This person made that money. And it's like, well, yes, maybe. And there are always people who make money on different things, but there's suitability, I think, is the biggest thing that people miss when they're starting out. And what that means is, well, people who are already very, very wealthy, they have money to lose. You might hear about how they made a lot of money on something. They won't tell you about how they lost a lot of money on something. And if they lost a lot of money on something, it doesn't matter because they have a lot of money. So the more money you have, the more risk you could take, which is also very important. Some of those numbers that you showed in the beginning, where your money grows at 5%, yeah, your money grows at 5%. Equities actually have a return closer to 8%. So, and that difference between 5 and 8 actually materially moves those end numbers after 30 years. So it doesn't sound like a lot, the difference between 5 and 8, but it is a big difference. And so what I mean is you can take a little bit more risk, but you shouldn't be shooting for things that are, oh, I'm trying to make 100%. I'm looking for the most risky thing, because those are also things where you can lose all of your money. And they're just not suitable for beginner investors who are trying to get themselves in a position where they can take a lot of risk. Once you have a big nest egg, once you have a lot of savings, then you can take more risk. You can learn about more aggressive investments, because then you can take little pieces and you can put, a few percent in crypto. You can do a few percent of high beta internet stocks. And so then it's like, oh, if it works, it works. If it doesn't work, it's not the end of the world for you. So I think that is like the biggest thing that people miss in the beginning. In the beginning, you want to let compounding work for you. So Seth said the S&P 500. I tell every beginner investor, look, if you spend the next 5 to 7 years living within your means, saving that little piece every month, and you put that piece in every month, there are going to be months when the S&P's up, there's going to be months when it's down. It's probably going to go up more than it's going to go down. Over a 5 to 7 year period, you will probably be up a decent amount, and that compounding is really going to start to work. Over that time period, you can then learn a little bit more. You can learn about the companies you might want to invest in, learn about the markets, and you can slowly expand your repertoire. Then when you have a little bit more money, you can take a little bit more risk. If you want to dabble in crypto, okay, you can dabble in crypto. You don't need to become a crypto day trader or put all your money into a boom or bust thing, right? I think suitability and understanding and the power of compounding and things that are going to be relatively stable over long periods of time. U.S. equities are very stable over long periods of time. There will be a 2020, there'll be a 2008, but over longer periods of time, in US equities, you're going to be around 8 or 9%. In bonds, you're probably going to be around 3 or 4%. You can have a mix of the two. But I think it's really, you can do a lot. You can make a lot of money by having a salary that a physician has, taking out a little piece every month, putting it in the equity market for a 30-year period. You will retire successfully if that's all you do. And then over your 30 years, if you also want to learn about some more risky investments, and yes, you can dabble in some of those, and you might become good at some of those, then you can really do well. But you don't even need to do that to do well with the more predictable salaries that you guys will have, as long as you are not overspending and as long as you are consistent and are doing it for the long term. So I would say that's kind of like my risk tolerance advice is like, just in the beginning, you cannot do super risky things. It just doesn't work in the beginning for anyone.
I think that's our last comments for this evening. I want to thank everyone for being here tonight. It's 8 p.m. Now it's 9 p.m. So thank you for sharing your evening with us. I want to thank the organizing committee, and especially want to thank our panelists. You guys have really shed a lot of important wisdom for the audience, and certainly for myself. Jennifer, if you want to convey a couple of questions to us, we're opening that forum up now. Anything that came through the chat or that you've seen?
Sure. So one of the first questions we had is, how do percentages of the budget, as Dr. Jones was talking about, how do they vary if you have a high debt to income ratio? Or do they vary?
I could answer that just from my own personal experience. I came out with a lot of debt, and being in residency for 6 years plus fellowship, didn't make a lot of money for a long time. So it did take me a while to start savings, but I started small. I definitely didn't do 20% to start with, but I tried. I had the, similar to Cameron, I had the 7 to 9% loan. So I tried to pay those off. Wish I'd paid them off faster. And then once I felt more financially secure, started putting money away. So you definitely have to factor that into your own personal debt to income ratio. And, truthfully, I looked at jobs and I looked at fields that would help me to be more financially secure. Working in a bigger city, going into a field that I love, but was maybe a little bit more financially profitable than other fields.
We had a couple of questions about med school loans and loan repayment. You were all talking about paying back loans. Somebody raised the question, what about income-driven payment plans? And when we talk about that, you also mentioned deferrals. And I just wanted to point out the difference between a deferral and forbearance, because I think there might be some conflation between the two. So maybe those are some terms, if anybody has expertise and wants to go over what those are. Or I can.
Please go ahead.
Okay, so income-driven loan repayment plans are plans that the government has set up where you should be driven to them based on your debt to income ratio. So it's about, how much income you're making at the time and how much loans you have. And so they should put you in a plan that meets you where you are, so that the loan payment is not exorbitant for your income. And it's typically available to people like residents or people going into sort of public interest or lower paying fields who may have high debt, student debt. It also can help you go into some of the loan repayment options like the PSLF, the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program, that's currently available from the Department of Education. And the only thing about the deferral, so sometimes I know plans will give you a deferral, meaning you don't have to pay your loans for a certain amount of time and they will not accrue interest, but forbearance is when it's in you're not paying it back, but it is accruing interest. So I would say do not go into forbearance. And the purpose of the income-driven payment plans are to help you avoid that. I know that as a government person, there's recently been a scandal where a lot of student loan servicers were driving these individuals towards forbearance as opposed to income-driven payment plans. So please, when you're researching these options, make sure you know the options that are out there to you. All right. And I think we talked about this a little bit, but it might help to reinforce one thing, but how should students, medical students, residents, how can you get the advice that you need when you're looking to plan your finances?
So I would say there's a lot of books you can read. And I would say, like, the beauty of the group that you're speaking to now is, like, these are all smart people who are passionate and who are learners and who, they can absorb information. Like, doctors are pretty smart. Like, there's a lot of material out there. I would say the one thing you don't want to do is you don't want to not learn about, you can't have your head in the sand. A book I recommend is Rich Dad, Poor Dad. It's a great book, beginner, for thinking about the world of how to manage yourself like a business and personal finance. A great place to start, but there are dozens of books. And once you read one, you learn a little bit about, oh, I didn't even think about that. And I didn't really understand how all that fit together. Then you read another. And then I've beat my wife into a financial education because, I kind of just force her upon it. And for a while, she's like, oh, I don't really want to know. I'll let you just handle it. I was like, well, you can't just let me handle it. What if I die tomorrow? And so I think a lot of it is, for doctors, you've already been self-selected. You're smart people. So this information is out there. And if you take it year by year and learn and learn and learn, you will be at a place when you're in your 40s where you can invest in crypto if you want. You can do more risky stuff because you actually will have some money. You'll be surprised with how much money you have if you start on this when you're in med school and residency and learning, because it will add up quickly. Because those are high salaries. It will add up quickly if you follow all those instructions and then you do the learning at the same time.
There's a resource.
At the same time,
go ahead, Seth, go ahead,
make sure. I'd make sure you use your mentors. So you're going to have mentors throughout life, other residents, attendings, other physicians, and a lot of them have made financial mistakes. So you can learn from their mistakes, learn from our mistakes, and get advice from people who have lived through it, right? We have all these ideas and they're all, we expect it to be linear, but things come up. People get sick, people get divorced, people have financial issues, and you have to be able to think on the fly. So educate yourself, like Cameron's saying, but also use mentors, right? Get advice, not only about medicine, but about life and about finances from those people you trust.
I know when I went through this growing phase of my career, which was admittedly much later than it should have been. It was like a few years into attending life. It seemed overwhelming, right? I didn't have any deep knowledge about anything in the finance world. Stocks, like, yeah, I guess people make tons of money. I have no idea what they're doing. It seems like just putting money in and hoping for the best. But the reality is there aren't that many domains of knowledge that you'll need to understand to be just as a starting point. You need to get some foundation of what is disability? Do I need it? What's it going to mean for me? What are the different kinds? How am I going to get it? So forth. And there's like 5 of these things, right? Disability, life insurance, your emergency fund, how to start investing, how to save, how to do your monthly budget. That's a lot already. And you can do that. You can get that knowledge base by doing some internet searches, finding the appropriate books. There's a tool I liked, which now that I look back, I realize is probably biased and maybe not so dogmatic in the way it's presented, but there's this thing called a white coat investor. I'm sure a lot of people have seen that. It's a website. This guy just blogs about it, but he's deeply passionate. He talks about it meaningfully. And I don't take anything that's said on that as the only source of knowledge, but I do look at certain things and say, well, okay, I need to start thinking about where my retirement plan is, what it's doing. What is my disability portfolio really like? Is it enough for coverage? And so it gets my mind thinking about some of these topics. And then I keep looking and I keep talking and I talk to financial advisor people. And as Cameron said, this is like a multi-year process, just like your educational experience will be once you graduate. It's like CME work basically for yourself. And so just starting the process is not so hard, even though it seems overwhelming. You accrue more knowledge, you get more curious, you realize, wow, this is really healthy. I'm glad I'm doing it. It feeds itself. So start with literally anything and it'll keep going you in the right direction. The worst thing you can do is just like not start in the first place, which a lot of us unfortunately do.
It's also easier than what your guys' day job is. I'm telling you. I know a lot of physicians and I know a lot of financial people. Like, if you can do what your actual day job is already, and you've all been self-selected into that group, you'll learn about finance and personal investments over time if you're just curious about it. It's not the most complicated stuff in the world.
Jen, I think maybe one or two more questions max, and then we should call it a night.
Sure. We did have a couple of questions about setting up a practice afterwards. This may be beyond the scope of this, but in terms of looking for jobs, do you have any advice there when you're leaving in terms of making sure you're set financially when you're looking for a job?
You know, having done this and looked at both sides of it, I might be able to answer it. I mean, I just rejoined the faculty at Cornell, and I'd been in private practice for 18 years, and I'd worked for Cornell for 13 years before that. And in coming out, I think that you need to get a good lawyer. I think that's something that really does help you in negotiating your contract, because as physicians, we're sort of like, oh, that sounds really good, I'll just do that. But having someone to look at your contract and give you advice on it is really worthwhile. You need to look at your debt ratio and what type of job you can accept and where you're going to work. And, look at, if you really have a great deal of debt, look at if there's any programs or residencies that you can join that may have some loan forgiveness. And again, looking carefully and knowing that you are worth something and that you need to get the best possible deal that you can. We're always so grateful to be offered a job, but we need to realize that, we need to negotiate that job and get the best possible that we can. Because once you're in, it's not going to change that much.
It's probably also, so I did this recently with Lauren because she's a young attending. It's also important to realize that a small private practice is a small business. And so this is not really it's a little more advanced than what we're talking about now, but you do want to have some idea of what the business's financials look like. Now, this is more complicated, but there's a big difference between joining a Cornell faculty and then joining a 3-person private practice where you actually need to see the details of the business, the debt on the business, the books of the business. And all I mean is, the biggest thing, if you take anything from what I said, I would say you need to empower yourself with information, and you can never have it be like, oh, well, I just don't know. And so in those little, when you make your decision, private practice, big group, big private practice, you just want to know that the background of the business you also need to know. The smaller the business is, the more important that is, because the more volatility that will come up if you're a 3-person practice, one person is injured, can't work, it really affects you. You're in a giant practice, one person quits or is injured, it doesn't really mean much for you. So I would say that's very important to consider.
All right. We have time for one more. I want to be respectful of our panelists this evening. One just came in about purchasing a home. And since this is such a large expense and probably something people are looking towards either during residency or right afterwards, do you have any advice for individuals who are entering that scenario where they're planning on both purchasing a home and carrying their debt from medical school, while maybe as a resident salary or early attending?
I mean, I think the only advice I would have is not overspending. And if you're not feeling very comfortable with your finances, don't take on additional debt, right? The house will come at some point, but to go out and buy a house when what you don't want to do is get a new job and then go out and buy a house and then feel locked into that job because you have all this additional debt. So make sure you're very comfortable with your job and where you are at life and how much debt you have before you add more debt. That would be my recommendation.
Yeah, I totally agree. A home purchase should be relatively at a stable part of your career where you're really comfortable with making a root in that environment, because for a long time, it won't be necessarily an asset or have financial gain for you. It could be a very volatile housing market. You might buy it and then have to sell it for a loss, and that's not in your best interest. It's also a significant financial strain for a period of time. You have to come up with a down payment. There's a transaction cost. Often you'll find that when you move in, you got to do a whole lot, buy a whole bunch of furniture, do some repairs and so forth. And so your monthly budget is going to be pretty disrupted for a while. So I would say perfectly healthy to start saving for a down payment. There's no harm in doing that. I think setting up a separate account just for that down payment purchase that's in a relatively low volatility fund is a great idea. It gives you something to look forward to. It gives you responsibility of savings towards something. But actually pulling the trigger should be when you're like 100% certain this is what you want, at least for 5 to 10 years. Because physician careers are hard to upend. Once you start in a job, you want it to grow, develop, become successful over time. But if you need to change, it could be a big deal. You might have to leave your whole city because you signed a non-compete and now you've got a home that you own. You need a new job. It creates a huge conflict. So that should be a little bit deeper than when you first graduate from residency. I purchased my apartment in New York City 4 years after finishing training. And I was aggressive about it. And I think looking back, I could have waited another year or two and it was fine. It worked out really well, but I definitely wasn't ready to do it the first few years after finishing. It's too soon for a lot of people.
Well, I'm just going to go ahead and wrap this up. Thank you to all of our panelists so much for joining us tonight and sharing all of your experiences. I know I saw in the chat, thank you for sharing candidly about your own lives and advice. I think it was well appreciated, and thank you. And thank you, Dr. Tabaee, for organizing this and leading this discussion. It was very valuable and we greatly appreciate it. So we will be sending out a recording and it will be available on the AMSNY YouTube channel. So please look for it there and share with anyone else you think might like to see it and wasn't able to join tonight. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Good night.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.